Kenya Stump serves as Executive Director for the Energy Office of Energy Policy, and she's going to not only moderate the discussion, but also share Kentucky's perspective on data centers, large loads, and tools needed to help inform states to plan for the associated demand growth. Then we'll hear from Hamali Pamar. And if you could advance the slide, please. Sorry. Parmar, who's Vice President of Energy Markets for ICF, and she'll be discussing the new report, How to Find the Sweet Spots to Build All Those Data Centers report. Following Himali, you'll hear from Clayton Barrows, a Senior Research Engineer and Group Manager with the National Laboratory of the Rockies, and he'll be discussing the accelerating speed to power mapping tool that they've developed and how they're utilizing that to provide better insights on grid impacts of data center integration. And then finally, you'll hear from Liang Min, who is co-founder of Grid Care. And he'll be exploring studies they've done that show how today's grid is significantly underutilized, and optimizing existing infrastructure could be the first step to meeting new demand. He'll be highlighting methods and demonstrated successes in unlocking latent capacity from existing assets. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to our esteemed moderator, Kenya. So take it from here, Kenya. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. Such a great opportunity to moderate this session. It's been a privilege to be a board member of NASEO. As all the state energy offices can relate, data centers and utility discussions with our PSCs and legislatures have all been ramping up lately with questions around where should they be sited, how do communities participate and engage, how can communities prepare, also where do we have capacity to locate data centers. A lot of this is, I'm pleased to see our presenters, is really a geospatial question when we look at how can we look at probable opportunities for site location and steer data centers into places where they can look like a grid asset rather than what we've been hearing as a grid issue. Super excited about our panelists today to talk about their geospatial work and their activities around siting data centers, but also how data centers can become more flexible and looked at in terms of how we interconnect, which can influence our utilities tariff designs, PSC activities, as well as information that we need when responding to potential legislative actions within the state. So without further ado, really excited to have our first panelist, Himali Parmar. She's Vice President of Energy Markets for ICF. They recently released a report that I found very valuable, and if anyone has not seen the report, I hope we can link that into the chat. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Hamali and for her to look at and help us understand where are these sweet spots, considering siting is about optimizing a variety of conditions to find optimal locations. So Hamali, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Kenya. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. And thank you to NASEO for giving me the opportunity to discuss the data center siting, a topic that is top of our mind, for many of us, and I am especially for state energy offices as you all navigate, an unprecedented demand growth. My name is Himali Parmar. I'm a vice president at ICF, where I lead the energy and digital infrastructure investment practice. We work extensively, moving to the next slide, with various stakeholders in the large load space, including data center developers, utilities, state agencies on siting and grid planning. Today, I will share findings from our recent report on data center siting and show how we are helping support data center developers identify optimal locations, as Kenya said, what we call sweet spots for development, but also discuss key considerations and opportunities for state energy offices as you all work to attract development while ensuring grid reliability, affordability, and community support. Starting with opportunities, moving to slide 3. Across the country, we are observing a strong demand growth driven by data centers, rather not just data centers, but also industrial activity. This surge represents a generational opportunity to modernize the grid, enhance reliability, and deliver long-term value to all customers. Energy experts, I will throw myself into the mix. We did expect electricity demand to rise, given the drivers of strong U.S. Economic growth. However, the rapid spikes due to data centers were not predicted to occur as quickly as they have. So forecasters over the last couple of years particularly have been revising demand growth projections upwards for the most part. However, in the last couple of months, particularly, and PJM was the market which showed up with the biggest breaks, where we saw that there were breaks applied to near-term demand growth, especially period between now and 2030, as planners have recognized that there are gaps in infrastructure to accommodate load reliably. Nonetheless, as we show on this map, we expect electricity demand to grow at the rate of approximately 3% through 2030 and 2.2% through 2050, and really contrasts with the previous 2 decades when US electricity demand was essentially flat. There was no increase in demand growth. So that's an opportunity. Demand growth is always good, but this opportunity is not without challenges that must be addressed. So moving to slide 4. What we show on this map is an overlay of 3 factors: planned data centers. These are planned data center locations, available grid capacity, which has been estimated through 2030. While the colors show, that these are blobs of colors, but underlying data is really at the individual substation level. So there's several tens of thousands of substations across US for which this grid withdrawal capacity or grid's ability to accommodate new load has been calculated. And what's also shown on this map is an existing fiber optic infrastructure. So when you look at these 3 variables, you can see ideal locations, the green and the blue areas that are good capacity from a grid point of view and fiber access. But you'll also see that the 2030 visual shows that there's a lot of reds, meaning that it's increasingly scarce to find those optimal spots to situate a large load. The red areas have minimal grid capacity available, and they are declining. So as I move to slide 5, and contrasting that grid capacity between year 2030 and 2032, and zooming into PJM, Pennsylvania, Jersey, Maryland, PJM ISO. With PJM, with the planned load, which is already assumed in PJM's 2025 load forecast, the 2032 heat map, which is to the right, shows there's a lot more red than greens, and which shows that not only were the sites decreasing over the course of the next 4 or 5 years, but as you go further out through 2032, this is becoming increasingly scarce. So for data center developers that we support, we impress upon the need for assessment and the due diligence that they have to do on assessing the deployment of their projects and the underlying assumptions on how much load is going to materialize, not just in broad brush, in terms of 2% or 3%, but really in close proximity to the land parcel that is of interest is very, very critical. Moving to slide 6. Recognizing the opportunities and challenges in the various stakeholders in this space, we have developed at ICF a comprehensive framework for evaluating data center sites. And this isn't just about 1 or 2 factors, and really draws upon our decades of experience supporting energy asset developers, where successful siting requires analyzing multiple dimensions simultaneously. Starting with energy and gas infrastructure, the most critical, this includes not just whether there is a substation in close proximity to the land parcel, but whether the grid has a withdrawal capacity, as I was showing earlier, whether the system is stable enough for a 24/7 operation, what are the interconnection processes and costs look alike in the utility that you're looking to interconnect with, and increasingly whether there is natural gas infrastructure nearby to support on-site generation. While energy dominates the conversation, there are other factors that can derail the project just as easily. Fiber optic infrastructure is the second pillar. Data center needs high speed, high bandwidth connections, proximity to long-haul fiber, and the potential for data center clustering where you can benefit from co-location really matter. Moving to slide 7. Environmental factors we've observed can often get underestimated until they create significant delays. For example, as we show in the figure, even in arid regions like the Texas Panhandle, wetlands can be prevalent and can need to be accommodated for. Water access for cooling, flood risks, ecological habitats all need assessments early. Finally, last but not the least, regulatory and policy considerations. As an example, states compete on incentives. Georgia could offer sales and use tax exemptions, and these aren't, for example, small differences. They meaningfully impact project economics. And equally important, if not more, is and what matters most for local and state energy offices is community acceptance. We do see projects getting stalled or canceled because of community opposition around noise, water usage, or simply lack of engagement. So bringing it all together, moving to next slide, how this all comes together is a case study that we put together in our paper on Loudoun County, Virginia, home of the data center alley, the largest concentration of data centers in the US. What we show here on the map is, data center sweet spots. These are locations where we, as we look forward into 2030, we could see that meet all key criteria simultaneously. These are parcels which are industrial or mixed-use zoning within 1,000 feet of a fiber optic line, near substations which have 100 plus megawatts of available withdrawal capacity as assessed for year 2030, and minimal flood risks. As we ran this case study, what we found striking was that there's about 1.5 million land parcels in Loudoun County. And by 2030, with all the factors that I just outlined, there are only 600 or 0.04% of the parcels that meet these combined criteria. So where the value of analysis and tools like this and the data underlying is of value is to help focus really the development conversations on areas most likely to succeed. However, as we support our data center developer clients, particularly, you need detailed site diligence to design, what could be a phased ramp of a facility, accounting for perhaps a mismatch between the speed and scale at which the facility can be deployed versus the pace with which the utility can make grid upgrades needed to meet the data center demand. We also perform sensitivities around, other new load and supply requests in the area, and develop a more rigorous thesis around self-curtailment or build your own generation, which is increasingly important as well. Moving to the next slide. Wanted to briefly introduce the tool behind this analytics. It's Energy Insight platform. We have a siting module within that platform, which integrates the grid capacity, the power infrastructure, interconnection queues on the supply side, fiber optical network, environmental data sets, land parcels, zoning information, market prices at the individual node level, policy and incentive database, and natural gas pipeline data. So there's all of the factors that I discussed earlier are integrated. And what it helps our data center developers is screening for hundreds of parcels in a matter of hours, days, not months, and focusing on detailed diligence on the most promising locations. For utilities who are using this, it means they can proactively identify where development pressures are likely to occur and perhaps consider build ahead strategies with more robust data and insights. For state energy offices, it provides an analytical foundation to have informed conversations with both developers, utilities, and market operators. In closing, moving to the next slide, a successful data center siting based on our analysis requires analyzing energy infrastructure, fiber networks, environmental factors, and policy environments simultaneously. And I also wanted to mention that we are hosting a webinar next week where we plan to share findings of a study focused on PJM, on large load flexibility. And the reason I mentioned that is that, with the backdrop of the winter storm in, large parts of the US, what we are observing is that the flexibility from new load is extremely important. As we see, there's a potential to integrate larger amount of loads if that load could come with some level of flexibility. And we'll plan to do that under different ranges of scenarios, including extreme weather and the impact that flexibility could have on wholesale and retail rates in PJM. So we invite you to join us next week. Thank you. And I look forward to the panel discussion.
Thank you, Hamali. I believe most of the energy offices would be really interested in looking at your Energy Insights platform. We do our own site suitability modeling, but it'd be great to get a preview of what's inside your platform. With that, it's a real nice transition that we'll get to move over to the Clayton with the National Lab of the Rockies. Many of the energy offices were involved with NASEO in speed to power comments and how we were going to approach that, as well as with the tools that have been developed. But for some of us, we'd really appreciate a deeper dive into that, what's evolving, what the National Lab of the Rockies is looking to in terms of the tool package. So with that, I'm going to turn over to Clayton. We've got his slides up, and it's all you, Clayton.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm Clayton Barrows. I'm a group manager here at National Lab of Rockies, recently formerly known as NRAL, but we have been renamed. So, yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the projects we have. One of them is principally around large load integration and siting, and in the near term, that really is focused around data centers. So, one thing we have recognized is that people have often talked about data centers as a category of loads, much like people would talk about generators. But there's a lot of nuance to that isn't often discussed. Just like you might not speak about wind generators in the same way that you would speak about nuclear generators, data centers have a lot of diversity in how they can and do operate. So we're trying to capture that in one step of this project of trying to figure out how to categorize data centers properly for load characterization in grid models, and ultimately for siting and planning infrastructure to support their loads. So that's one aspect. Another aspect is that we have this load growth projections that have been pretty popular as of late. We heard about those a little bit already, but we know that these load growth projections are highly speculative. There's a number of these that are collected from requests, and those requests are often competed against each other, and they are the developers looking to find the opportunities for powering their data centers fastest. And so we're trying to get our hands around what that really means in terms of how much uncertainty there is in these load projections, as well as what are the consequences of that uncertainty. So we're doing a lot of modeling to try to understand what are the consequences of if a data center, or really at a macro scale, if the industry projects a lot of load growth and we build infrastructure to support it, what happens to the grid and the customers of the grid if that infrastructure is built and the load doesn't materialize. So we have some papers coming out that will help indicate some of those results. So specifically, this project is really thinking about like this data center planning problem. I like to think about it in terms of grid planning, and specifically in terms of three phases. So the first phase is really we have to plan a system that can respond to the types of perturbations that may emerge, sometimes due to data center load fluctuations, but it could be really anything, contingencies, things like that. And those automatic responses happen at fairly short time scales. We also think about how are we going to make sure that we can schedule and balance the system at a forward-looking, but relatively near-term, minutes, hours, days, even up to a year, scheduling, balancing. This is often done through the markets and other other systems like that. And then finally, we have a planning problem, which is like, how do we plan to build the infrastructure we need to support these demands? Ultimately, this is a pretty wide scale of decision making. And the challenge here is that while I just presented the grid decision making timescales, the timescales that govern data centers are a little bit different. In particular, the compute scheduling timescales really eat down into the automated response timescales of grid operations, and they are often much shorter than the grid scheduling timescales. And then the data center development time is quite a bit shorter than the development time required to plan and build generation and transmission. And this is a major challenge for the grid because you can't build grid infrastructure in 18 months, or at least not very much. And so we're trying to figure out how do we break that chicken and the egg cycle and also identify the near-term opportunities that I think Lang is going to talk a little bit more about to eke the most capacity out of the existing resources. This project and my project is in a portfolio of projects that is funded by the U.S. Department of Energy. What was formerly the Grid Deployment Office is now the Office of Electricity, where we're really trying to get a handle around both local and national scale grid impacts of data center and large load development. So a little bit about what we're actually doing. So first observation was that data centers have been developed, they exist, they're being developed actively, and so we needed to collect data around where they are, where they're going, and what's driving those decisions. So we've collected that data and merged it into a map. I have a link on my last slide called the speed to power map. We also layered that on top of a number of other things that may matter, including the site favorability and location relative to existing fiber optic networks and transmission networks and other aspects that may influence data center siting decisions. That's all inputs into a framework that we've developed that kind of follows this pathway, where we really look at geospatially what sites are feasible from a land use perspective. Can you develop there? Are there limitations to that in terms of environmental restrictions or siting restrictions? And then favorability in terms of how close are you to existing infrastructure that might indicate lower cost or more suitable development opportunities. And then these last two circles, I think, are a little bit more interrelated than they are indicated on this map, in that there's a selection of sites that could be developed and then the integration opportunity. And I think that there's a lot of iteration or co-optimization, or however you might frame it in terms of math, in terms of what are the trade-offs between deployment and grid integration. So can you select sites that will allow you to integrate faster? If you integrate in a particular location, do you need to fund grid upgrades? And then vice versa, can you avoid those in other locations with different types of data center design and flexibility opportunities? So this tool has been built. It's called Reveal. We have put out a number of products, and the first being sort of the static data center map, and then I have a link to the speed to power map that we've built for DOE, where really the intended audience ranges from data center developers to local decision makers who are looking to figure out what should they plan for, where are the best locations to be thinking about data center integration, and what will they need to think about when they really encounter some of those applications or encounter some of the issues that they might incur in the siting process. One thing that we have learned, especially with this discrepancy in development timelines, is that there's a significant opportunity to mitigate some of the impacts of data center integration or a desired data center siting scenario with a variety of different mitigation options. So we are thinking about both hedging for uncertainty and thinking about how do you make sure that the impacts aren't passed on to the wrong group of people. And then as well as finding opportunities to help indicate where data centers should integrate in various locations in the grid and in various markets. And then finally, to align investment options with things like co-location of resources or bring your own power solutions or flexible service contracts or other opportunities to mitigate the need to build infrastructure, which is really a major challenge, both all the way from the supply chain to the siting considerations. It's just a major challenge all the way up the line. So we're working on a couple of reports. One is to really understand what are the impacts of data center integration, or sorry, of data center load not showing up. And I mean, do you end up with just a nice gold-plated, highly reliable system, or do customers end up holding the bag for a much more expensive grid? And so that problem is also dovetailed with a question of what can you do to avoid as much infrastructure development as possible. And so these mitigation options are going to be highlighted in an upcoming report, probably out in the next month, is my guess. One example of a mitigation option that is maybe going to play here, yeah. So is these dynamic line ratings. So FERC has already made steps towards requiring the use of dynamic line ratings, at least an initial step towards dynamic line ratings. But with these, we see opportunities for getting some additional capacity out of the existing transmission network, at least during some times of the year. And so how does that align with data center operations and the opportunity for data center flexibility or the combination of data center and local resource flexibility? So this is one of the questions we're trying to address with the studies that we're working on at a national scale. And then ultimately, our goal here is to move towards an open source site specific siting analysis tool to help policymakers figure out what the impacts would be on a local basis. And we are not making a prediction tool, but we are making an opportunity for folks to ask what if scenarios. What if we developed a policy that really supported data centers or large loads in a particular region? What would the grid requirements of that policy look like, and what could the grid requirements of that policy look like, and what would be the consequences of that to the ratepayer and the utility, and so on and so forth. And finally, this map here is kind of the current collection of input data that we've collected that many folks have found useful. It allows you to toggle on and off layers and zoom into your area of interest. And if anybody finds it interesting or anybody finds additional features that should be integrated, please let me know. Thanks.
Thanks, Clayton. Really impressive suite of tools from NREL NREL. I still say NREL and NLR. And we look forward to the future reports in this space to help states kind of answer questions we get around the most popular. Where are the data centers going? How many are going to get here? When can they get here? How are we going to power them? So very excited about the tools you all are producing for us to utilize. And we'll be getting you some feedback on additional layers that we're looking at and how maybe we can improve the tool. But with that, we're going to round out our webinar with grid care. And we've got Liang Meng here, and he's going to talk about how we can playing off a little bit of these grid enhancing technologies, how we can enhance grid utilization while maintaining affordability when we locate data centers, and how we can locate them in areas that can actually enhance the grid and provide some flexibility. So Liang, turn it over to you.
Thank you, Kenya, for moderating this wonderful panel. And good morning and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Liang Ming from Grid Care, and which is a Stanford spin-off startup. And thanks, NASEO, for organizing this webinar and have the opportunity to share our perspective. Why optimizing the electrical grid is essential to speeding power delivery for AI data center while maintaining affordability, and why site selection matters when viewed through both from the geological and the temporal perspective. Next slide. Besides an entrepreneur, I'm also an educator. So very often I'd like to explain to people that how we design our electrical system. I teach classes Stanford every year called Electrical System Planning with Emerging Generation Technology and Large Load. So much like a highway system, the electrical grid is not congested everywhere at all time. But the traditional planning often assumes peak loading everywhere simultaneously. If I use engineering terms or language, the electrical grid is designed around the infrequent peak condition and typically some peaks. And the worst case contingencies, we use so-called N-1, sometimes it's -1, or -2, do the analysis. That approach makes perfect sense to ensure the reliability when load growth is gradually and predictable. But today, load is growing rapidly and in concentrated locations. If we don't optimize our existing electrical system and better utilize the safety margin we already built into the system, we risk overbuilding new infrastructure before fully utilize what we already have, and driving up the cost and burdening the ratepayers. Next slide. So first, what I'd like to share is a recent Stanford research from my team on the transmission utilization was published maybe a month or 2 months ago. So what we realize is across the West interconnection, the transmission systems are typically operate way below their thermal and contingency-based limits. The results are staggering. The numbers are staggering. Even under the stressed 2025 heavy summer N-1 condition, by seeing that, and when you do the calculation, we already factor in the reserve margin planned for the worst case contingency that could happen in the West Coast. And even on that conditions, the many lines remain lightly loaded. On average, lines carry only about 18 or 20 to 50% of rated capacity, with many of them is around 30%. And on the positive side, this means that there's a real headroom to serve new load, such as AI data centers, manufacturing load, and even this room not just for the load, but also for the new generation, if we can safely access it. Next slide. If we deep dive into one state, the state where I live in, California, California shows the same pattern and even more clear. And under the N-1 condition, and our 115 kV line system is about 33% of loading, and the 230 kV line system about 37%, and the 500 kV line is about 31%. And the transformer are more utilized, and average is about 45%, but still remain enough margin. In other words, on average, most of California bulk power system operates way below half of the rated capacity, and even under the worst case N-1 contingency. But if we look into one category, like 230 kV system on your right-hand side, and California has a large 230 kV system, has more than 1,000 transmission line under this category. What we observed is a long tail of lightly loaded transmission line. Only a very small number, about 50 lines, they are experiencing very high loading. But in engineering ways, the electrical grid is a meshed network. These few highly congested elements, lines or transformer, can effectively constrain a much larger portion of the system. So targeted investment to relieve these congestions can potentially unlock substantial capacity across the whole state, across a large area. And in parallel, when siting new large load, data center manufacturing, it makes sense to really prioritize location where the grid is already underutilized, has a lot of available capacity exist. Next slide. Okay, now we talk about the problem. So let's talk about solution. And GridCare is a Stanford spin-off launched last year. So at GridCare, we combine the physical-based grid modeling with generative AI to map national transmission capacity at each substation or each point of interconnection. So we identify the firm capacity exists today and how it evolves under the future planning scenarios, next 5 years, next 10 years, for both load and the generation. This could help identify the co-location opportunity. And as you heard from Hamali and Clayton, similar capability you observed. And power matters for data center siting, but it's only part of the picture. Data center developers also evaluate the fibers, the land availability, electricity price, natural gas pipelines, the community acceptance, climate risk like flooding, and the water availabilities. And beyond the point of interconnection, we provide the insights also on the parcel level. And the underlying database is we integrate publicly available data sets, some of the proprietary and the utility approved data sets into the single platform. And we give the customer some suggestion to score and compare, because there's different type of data centers, right? If it's a large training data center, power is very important to them. And the fiber is less because they can get fiber relatively easy compared to the power. But if you are neural and a small data center or inferencing data center, and the fiber availability and the latency is a very important part, besides the power. And the same thing for the water side. If you are liquid cooling, then water is important. And if you are air cooling, the water is less important. If you use closed loop liquid cooling technology, and the water is less important. And also some of the developers are very interested the community perspective and how or if they're welcome to new data centers if they are not familiar with these regions. And some of the developers are interested that the natural disasters could happen in this region. So we have more than 2,000 utility over the last 30 years frequency and duration of outage data in our database. We use AI to process all of them. But this is one perspective, is really to help the data center find the greenfield sites. And we always tell them, go to the area that are underutilized. But in realities, and data center developers, they tend to cluster in the location where fiber is dense, land is available, and the permitting is predictable. And often where the data center operators already have established presence in these areas. So as a result, right, as we all understand, the growth really concentrate in familiar markets like Northern Virginia, Dallas, Phoenix, Hillsborough, Oregon, and the San Francisco Bay areas. And this creates challenges for utility in these areas because this area already highly congested. Large interconnection requests arrive very quickly, and but the traditional response often depend on the utility response, often depend on major transmission line and transformer upgrade, and push the timeline to 2030, even beyond. And this speed does not match what the AI load growth would like. And this speed cannot help us to win the AI arm race. Right? So one alternative approach we have demonstrated is to move beyond the traditional peak-based planning, but apply the detailed hourly 8760 load modeling and the grid flexibility strategy. Well, the grid is planned for peak condition. Those peak conditions only occur a very small portion, maybe 1% of the year. And by better utilizing the temporal headroom through the flexibility resources like the battery, on-site generation, even the technology on the grid side, like gas, grid enhancing technology, utility can safely interconnect a large load much easier without build a large infrastructure. Next slide. For example, we partnered with Portland General Electric and finished a joint project in Hillsborough to accelerate data center interconnection user flexible service. And this unlock 80 megawatt. This is an area that almost mission impossible anybody be able to connect a load in before 2028. And we unlock more than 80 megawatt by 2026 and over 400 megawatt by 2029, which years early traditional like heavy infrastructure weighted timelines. And the benefits are tremendous, right? And we bring construction jobs, tax revenues to the region sooner than expected. Next slide. But for today's conversation, what matters most is really the affordability, right? The question is not just like how fast we connect new load, but how those decisions affect customers' bill and the long-term system cost. And we published a public accessible white paper, and we use an example in this region. So 1 gigawatt data center connected flexibly can generate about $142 million additional utility revenue. And that revenue can be interpreted in two ways. One is it can lower the rates by spreading the fixed cost across large load base, and which is about a 5% potential reduction in this use case. Another is if we use 10.5 the capital charge rates, it can fund approximately over billion, 1.3 billion in new infrastructure without raising the rates. So the smart load growth doesn't just add demand. If we do it wisely, it improves the system, overall system economics. Last slide, please. So let me summarize this quickly. With this conversation, I had some discussion with my colleague Jessica Hoga, and who leads our policy work. And we'd like to offer some suggestions. First is really assess and publish the state level, utility level, control area level, the grid utilization data. So we track reliability, as I said, SAIDI, we track the energy efficiency, but not how well we utilize our existing transmission and distribution network. This matters because utility business model is capital-based. Utility invest infrastructure, regulate allowed recovery of the cost. Utility earn a regulated return of the approved investment. Right? Without the visibility into utilization, it's very hard to align the policy goals, market signals in investment decisions on the infrastructures, on the new infrastructures. And the second, speed matters. Data center need to pay their fair cost share of infrastructure upgrade, no doubt, right? But the reality is that large transmission lines, transformer, are unlikely to be completed for 5 or 10 years. The benefits of this new investment will not materialize until 5 or 10 years later, right? But on the flip side, with or without data center, we need to harden our aging infrastructure to withstand the extreme events like the storm we're experiencing right now. Right? Those hardening projects move forward, the rates will be increased because they'll be embedded into the general rate case. Without new load, the cost are borne by existing customers. One effective solution is really bring new customer into this general rate case. And the last but not least is really explore the performance-based rate structure or performance-based incentive that reward fast interconnection, high utilization, better customer cost outcome, etc. So together, I think these small suggestions can shift the focus from building more infrastructure to how we can best utilize the existing infrastructure and the speed to power. In the meantime, be able to protecting reliability and affordability. Thank you. Kenya, I will get this back to you.
Thank you, Liang. That was really informative. In a state where we have areas where large load growth like this could actually lessen pressure on residential rates, I think we're all interested on how we can cite in places to put downward pressure on rates when we bring in that kind of load growth. So with that, we encourage all the participants online to include any of your questions in the Q&A. NASEO is going to be following up on those. To kick things off on the Q&A, I do have a question. Since we are state energy officials, how can we utilize your tools to be more proactive than reactive? Right now, engagement starts after there's kind of a siting announcement, or there's a tariff filed at a PSC. I see these tools both helping state energy officials, but also really communities to prepare for siting conversations. So just your thoughts on how maybe we can utilize these tools to be more proactive rather than reactive.
I can start just with a couple. So everything that I shared and that we have intention of building and developing is either already openly accessible on the web or is open source tool and software development, some of which has a variety of usability. So there's some challenges there. Uh, One, and there are, but I will also mention a number of programs exist at the Department of Energy where organizations like state energy offices can get assistance from the experts at the national labs, not just NLR, but other national labs as well. So for these types of questions, there are a number of programs, and the calls are, available on an interim basis. So if you're interested if you want more information, feel free to send me an email and I'll connect you with the right people. But we do a number of technical assistance efforts, and some of the tools I mentioned, for example, we're using on technical assistance for, I think it's now 10 different state energy offices for issues like data center planning and 1920 compliance for FERC and things like that. So just a few things.
Himali or Liang, any thoughts on proactive versus reactive use of your tools?
Yeah, I see this as opportunities and challenges for the tools as they it's data and tools, and I appreciated both the other two tools that were shared as well. What is a challenge for a data center developer as they are looking at the tool that we have, and I would like to think the tools that were presented as well, that you want to stay away from. You want to look for where the grid has opportune megawatt grid withdrawal capacity, the lands available, the other environmental and permitting factors are all favorable to get to what are the sweet spots. So that is an opportunity for a developer. For a utility and a state office, the challenge that a data center developer, new load, which as Liang expressed very nicely, that more load does not always mean rates go up. It could be there is more megawatts that can socialize the cost burden that the ratepayer has. That a challenge that you see in terms of the grid capacity, I'll use that as an example, could be an opportunity for the state and the utilities to do proactive, or build ahead strategies. Taking us down the memory lane for ERCOT. What I thought, the competitive renewable energy zones that ERCOT developed in early 2000s, for example, identifying West Texas as an area which was rich in solar and wind, and seeing that as load was growing in the eastern parts of the state, coming up with the CREST zones and developing several $billion of transmission upfront, which then led to a lot of commerce in the state with all the wind and solar that came as a result. And now with a lot of load that is also both crypto, oil and gas related activity that has come because there is supply available, has led to a lot of opportunities for the state. So these tools can help our local and state officials to think about, local as an example for zoning. And are there areas which have the right grid capacity, the lands available, but probably the zoning is not, suitable for development of data centers. So these tools are definitely, you can change the metrics for a particular stakeholder, local and state offices, to be able to see how can you further economic development in the area.
Yeah, I think the first step is really help the state utility and data center better understand each other, right? And clear, predictable policy permitting environment reduce uncertainty for developers and allow the state to guide growth more intentionally. Right? Without this clarity, developer will naturally shop around, and the projects may move, may stop, and creating uncertainty not just for one state, but across multiple regions because they throw their projects everywhere, right? Because they feel the uncertainty. So state can also be proactive, as I said, by identifying the underutilized the grid areas and align the economic development goals and or that need jobs, need the infrastructure investment, need to expand the fiber network. And with the right planning, this area will become the design, the data center or economic development zone, as Hamali mentioned, right? We see this kind of the coordinated approach in other countries. Give you an example, Paris, France, right? They are developing a data center economic zone. And when the project coming, the fiber network will enhance, job will go to this area, and other economic opportunity will come as well. I think the clear, predictable policy is very important.
We did have a question in the chat for your tools. Do you incorporate like EPA's brownfield inventory? I know a lot of the sites may be brownfields that were decommissioned infrastructure that had power projects, but some of the energy offices are interested in how do brownfields play into this to try to maximize reuse of our existing kind of industrial locations.
I can quickly go. The ICF tool that we have put together that does account for the EPA's brownfield sites, and you can clearly see if there are any incentives available if for reuse or repurposing those facilities. So those are accounted for.
For us, yes, and more than that, because each state is different, right? For instance, California and the CEC published a very good land use data sets. So we integrate all of them. And many other states, the same thing, they publish their own data. So we integrate these data sets as well.
And I'll just say it's not included on the speed to power map currently, but I know I actually just checked with the developer and it is on their list of development. So they were trying to include it.
Well, Catherine and Camille, I know we're at 1:57, and you said you're going to share this with the group. NASEO has it recorded. Any links that were mentioned, we'll make sure we follow up on links that were mentioned during the webinar. We can utilize those state energy offices. I would encourage everyone to reach out and have a relationship with your geospatial team in your states, wherever they may be. They are critically important in terms of finding the right data sets to utilize. That may be specific to your state, but also there's some unlocked potential in the data at the PUCs that may not be what I would call in machine readable formats for us to be able to utilize. So I think there's some work on our end in terms of some data access and availability from our state-specific utilities, so we can do some more nuanced work. But with that, I really appreciate all of our speakers. Catherine, if you'd like to close us out from NASEO's perspective.
Thank you so much, Kenya, and thank you to all of you for your time and for participating in this event. Fantastic presentations and fantastic coordination, Kenya. So thanks to Kenya, Hamali, Clayton, and Liang. I also want to just point out that this is being supported through the through the Department of Energy. So we're very grateful for their support for this webinar series. We will follow up. Check out our website. I put it in the chat. This will be posted there, and you can see all the previous ones as well. And stay tuned for more from us on this topic. So with that, I'll thank you all for your participation. Take care.